I realized the brain is both the barrier and the breakthrough. And it really just depends on which side of that coin the environment is feeding and supporting. Culture is really what we see every day in our daily work. Those are the behaviors. And if we want to see ideal behaviors, we have to create an environment that supports those behaviors. And that's the neuroscience of culture in action, I think. The brain simply reflects the system that it's in.
Welcome to KPI Fireside. Our mission is simple: to improve companies and to improve careers through continuous improvement. In every episode, we explore the spark, the moment, the mindset, or the method that ignites real change. Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, you'll find the insights and inspiration to fuel your next improvement. Welcome back to KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. I am your host, Keith Norris. Our guest today is Christiana Hayes. Chris is the CEO of Impact Performance Solutions and a global leader in business performance improvement with nearly 30 years of experience. She's an award-winning speaker, author, and full-spectrum coach who has taught everyone from shop floor teams to executives. She's a Shingo licensed affiliate, an ASQ fellow. Chris blends practical know-how, humor, and deep expertise in Lean and Six Sigma to help organizations achieve real, lasting excellence. So Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Keith. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, it's so awesome to have you here. And I didn't even realize when we set this up that we are like almost neighbors. Literally, I'm sitting in Farmington, Utah, and you're in Morgan, Utah, right?
Yeah,
Like I can see the towers there, like just over that mountain.
that's all we
Practically
need
neighbors.
we need a tunnel, though, because it would take me about 15 minutes to get to you instead of having to go all the way around and, be 40. So
That's
let's
right.
start digging, my friend.
Well, anybody that knows me, I actually love to ride a mountain bike in the afternoons, and I will go up to those towers quite a bit. Get
That's a
to
ride. Holy
spend
Hannah.
spend. Well, we love to start our podcast out with a little section we call the spark. And what I found is a lot of people I meet in this discipline of continuous improvement, operational excellence, like, there might have been like a moment that you remember where you were like, there's something in this. I'm really excited. I'm passionate about this. Do you remember what that spark was for you?
Honestly, I got the spark completely by accident. I think it was like 95, 96, and I don't know, maybe this is for most people that have been around for a while, it was just accidental, but I was working at a steel company in, Layton, Utah, and my job at that time was managing all of the inventory. We had lots of sheet metal and coils of steel and all sorts of fun stuff. But we had a whole bunch more inventory than we should have had, which is, of course, we all know money spent but not being sold, right? So we were talking about, how are we going to know the right amount of stock to keep? And somebody mentioned this word Kanban, and I was like, "What the heck is that?" It sounded like something from a totally different world. And so it was our sales manager actually, and he explained, and then I got really curious, and pretty soon I was pretty knee deep into, well, not even knee deep, like neck deep into Lean, like Hotel California style. If you get that reference, I checked in, and I really never checked back out. Uh, since Lean was just catching on back then, this like I said, 95, 96, something like that. And remember, we didn't have internet back then like we do today, so I couldn't just go do searches. I did what everybody else did. And I started reading. And if you look at the number of books that was out back then, there weren't a whole lot of them. And so I just kind of, I hope this is okay, but I just made stuff up back then, and I tried to fit it to some of those books that I was reading. Like one of the first ones I read was Kanban, just in time, and of course the goal. That was the other one that was out, and so influential in my beginnings. And so, I guess like other people, we had a problem to solve at that time. Somebody introduced me to a lean tool to address it, and then I fell in love. Literally, just fell head over heels in love.
I love that. It's a story that I hear it so much. You have somebody who's like just naturally a problem solver. Obviously, in the role that you were in, you had demonstrated some capability to get stuff done, and then somebody along the way was like, "Hey, in your case, here's this Kanban thing," and you're like, "Wait, there's like a methodology to this thing that I
What?
kind of intuitively move towards."
Yeah.
You just said something that triggered a really funny memory. So I'm going to just tell you just a quick story. My daughter, who's now 29 next week, her first job working in a dental office, she came home one day as like an 18-year-old, and she just had this look on her face. Her mind was blown, and we're like, what happened? She's like, I just found out that adults make stuff up all the time. And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, we had this mom come in with her patient, and she said that she needed to have a note for her daughter to miss school." And my daughter, she's still in school at the time. And they said that I could just make this note, and I could say that she was at the dentist. And I didn't realize, like, adults just make stuff up. So I just made up this note, and I'm like, "Welcome to adulthood, kid. We're all just
Innocence
making it up as we
lost.
go."
I love it. I think we just do the best we can and in the situations that we're in, and sometimes we have to admit that that does include a little bit of creative thinking. How about that? We
There
don't
you
lie.
go.
We
There you go.
think creatively.
Well, you've got a book that you've written that's in, depending on when folks listen to this, it's probably already out, available. Tell us about the title of the book and just a little bit about that.
The book is called Wired for Excellence: Harnessing Brain Science for Organizational Success, and it's been one of the things that's been in the works for a few years for me, mostly sitting in my little brain. And I finally, after about a year, was able to get it close to publishing, and so it actually will be shipping next week on Friday. So yes, depending on when this goes out, hopefully it'll already be out there, and people will enjoy the work that I've done. It's all about neuroscience.
Absolutely. So from having an inventory problem and somebody saying Kanban to writing a book on neuroscience, which doesn't sound like, a children's story necessarily. Like it sounds like there's a lot of thinking. What are some of the challenges that you've faced and problems that you've solved, and maybe milestones from that early part of your journey to where you're at today?
Well, there are many, but one of the biggest challenges I've seen over the years, and I know others have as well, was the frustration that I saw in backsliding from events that we do. We do really great work, great improvement projects. We celebrate some really big wins, cool wins, and then 6 months later, you'd go back into the area and talk to the people or see the area that we did the work in, and it was gone. And this kind of pattern really created a quiet, I bother attitude among the teams that had worked so hard, but they didn't get to see the results stick. And so, by the, I would say, early 2000s, most of us that were in this world that early, we were looking for ways to sustain our efforts. And for me, the Shingo Institute is here in our backyard, right, up at USU, Utah State. At that time, I was working for the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and we were pretty connected with them, helping companies challenge for the Shingo Prize, which at that time was really primarily based on tool implementation. So if you did great things with Kanban and 5S and all of that, you could win the prize. At that time, though, they were seeing the same challenges that we all were seeing, that frustration with the sustainment. And so I think it was 2007, 2008, I think it was actually 2008, when the Shingo Institute first um, published what they now call the Shingo Model. It used to be just kind of the criteria for the prize, but the whole idea with that model was to address the challenge of sustainment. That model, which is very similar to what it is now, a little bit different, but it really helped me to understand what was going on with the sustainability problem we were having. Sustainability improvement, it doesn't come from more tools or better tools. It really just comes from aligning principles and systems and behaviors that we see in our organizations. And when principles guide the systems, and those systems are designed to reinforce the right behaviors, or what we call the ideal behaviors, culture becomes the real driver of the results. And culture, if you shape it intentionally, it will endure. That's what I learned. And what's kind of funny is every company already has a culture, right? Not many of them take the time to design for the one that they actually want. They had a culture, and they try to work within what they have. With with working with the Shingo model, that completely changed how I approached improvement. And it was really, I think, the biggest catalyst that made me fall in love with the culture side of CI, which I think has along those, this decade or so journey with culture made a big difference in that sustainment piece.
That's so interesting. I love the like the brain science angle that you've taken on this because I think that there is something intrinsic about our human desire to improve and to make progress, and this thing that you're saying about the sustainability problem. Like, it's such a common thing that people set this goal, they make improvement, and I mean, this applies to our personal lives too, right? Like,
Yeah.
you set the goal to run the marathon, and then you go sit on the couch for 12 months, or you
Mm,
set the goal to lose
oh,
20
not
pounds
me.
so you can fit into that outfit that you wore in high school, and then you give up on it, right? So,
So true.
what what is it about the connection with the brain science that you've found is the connection there for sustaining that change?
So let me kind of back up and give you a little bit of a background that got me into that piece of it. And there's a much deeper story here, Keith. But in a nutshell, and for time's sake, I'll summarize it by saying that it started with my oldest daughter's addiction recovery, which is a sad story, but in my case, it's a good story. During her treatment, and this was about 9 years ago, they taught us about neuroscience and how the brain responds under stress. Now, keep in mind, I was doing executive coaching and things like this at this time as well. But you think about how the brain responds under stress in addicts, like the intense stress of not getting their next fix, so to say. um, I'd always thought, because I do have addiction in my family. It's kind of one of those recurring themes throughout my ancestry, I guess. But I'd always thought addiction was about bad choices. But they really showed us when they taught us about neuroscience that what's actually happening in the brain of somebody struggling with recovery and addiction, it all of the sudden made sense to me. So, like I said, at this point or at that point, I thought it was a choice, but then I learned that there's something going on in here. So now I understood why addiction was happening, but I still didn't understand how to fix it. And again, I'm going through this with my daughter, so there's lots of emotions going on. I hope you never have to imagine anything like that. But that's when they taught us about this thing called neuroplasticity. And again, it's kind of like my Kanban journey. It was a really cool word, and I am curious by nature, so I had to go find out more about it. But neuroplasticity, it's basically how the brain can literally rewire itself through experiences and repetition and different things like that. And it was so cool because I got to see that play out firsthand with my daughter, who's again doing amazing now, by the way, 9 years sober, thriving, just something I thought was never, didn't happen. But seeing her through this transition, seeing her through this lens of transformation completely changed how I thought about people and really just change in general. And, if you've ever known an addict who has recovered or is in recovery, I should say, you know that this has to be the hardest change anybody can ever overcome. And again, it's amazing. It's not a miracle though. It's neuroscience. So anyway, at some point it hit me as I was doing all of these courses and sessions and such that this isn't just about addiction. The same wiring that they were explaining to us explains why people resist change at work and what it takes to help them adopt better habits and mindsets about change. And so that was my light bulb moment. I realized the brain is both the barrier and the breakthrough, and it really just depends on which side of that coin the environment is feeding and supporting.
So there's this like reward system in the brain, or there's like a model or something that I maybe you can give us a framework or some language to think about this, in the neuroscience terms.
Yeah, let me back up and get to the basics, maybe some of the foundational stuff about what's really happening in the brain when people face change in any environment, but also at work. When people experience change, and this is just stuff again that I learned through, those wonderful people that taught me and then the research that I did for the book. But when people experience change, especially the kind that they didn't choose, which happens often, by the way, at work, the brain doesn't exactly throw a party. It treats change as uncertainty. And uncertainty flips the brain's, I call it the uh-oh switch. And so, uh-oh, something's going on and we didn't know about it and we don't like it at all. So deep inside the brain sits two tiny almond-shaped structures called amygdalae. Think of it as your built-in alarm system, always scanning for danger. That's what it does. And it tends to think the worst in situations when it sees even the slightest bit of threat. So when the amygdala senses a threat or a potential threat, doesn't even have to be real, whether it's a bear in the woods that you've just run into on your bike out biking, or it's a new process or some change at work, what it's doing is it's hitting the panic button and it's setting off a series of stress responses. Think about adrenaline, increased heart rate, you get your sweaty palms, all of those kind of things. That's when the prefrontal cortex, which is the part right behind our foreheads that handles reasoning and planning and self control, that's when that starts to go offline, so to say. When you think about it, the brain can't both protect and problem solve at the same time. It's impossible. So, just like we would want it to do, survival is always going to win. If it feels like there's a threat, it's going to shut down or not feed our logic part of our brain. It's going to try to help us survive. And that's for good, like I said, for good reason. If I run into a bear out in the woods, I'm a huge animal lover. I think it would be so cool to play with bears. My logic tells me, no, you shouldn't do that. But I don't want to be in the middle of this attack going, oh, I don't want to hurt the cute little bear while I'm, trying to survive. So the brain's pretty smart that way. And it'll not necessarily turn off, but when your threat response goes on, your body is sending all its blood flow and the glucose and all that stuff to the rest of your body and getting ready to either fight or fly or freeze. And so it sends less of that stuff up to your prefrontal cortex. So it can't function at its best. So it's not really turned off, it's just not optimized. And that's why even those people, we consider really logical and level headed, sometimes they can suddenly show really extreme and out of character resistance for some sort of change or start to shut down or overreact or something that's just not normal. And what I've learned through the research is it's not attitude, it's literally the wiring that's going on in your brain based on previous experience and such. Now, once we calm down the alarm system because we restore some predictability or some, a little bit of logic gets in there. Like, maybe we can give some context to the situation or we allow people to have small choices in it or help them understand the progress that we're making. The brain realizes, okay, it's not a bear. We're cool. Let's relax a little bit. And the amygdala or amygdalae start to quiet down. They start relaxing and the prefrontal cortex starts getting its glucose and it starts getting its blood flow back online. And that's when people can finally think clearly. They can engage, they can contribute to the problem solving that there is. So that's kind of how things are working in the background.
So, knowing that that's happening in the brain of all of us and all of the others, for folks that are involved in this Lean Six Sigma discipline, this change management discipline, how can they use that knowledge of what's happening in the brains in their work?
Well, we know that logic doesn't implement change, right? That's not the part that's doing it. It's the people that are implementing change. And if rollout methods create some sort of ambiguity or fear, the brain's going to resist it and the improvements are going to stall. So, neuroscience is just giving us the why behind the resistance and the how to design those experiences that reduce threat and reinforce new behaviors. And so, folks like you and I that are out there helping to implement our Lean and Six Sigma experts, they can use this knowledge to move away from threats and into more of a reward state in the brain.
There's a few things that come to mind. When I have these conversations with folks, there's this one common theme is how do you approach people when you're, let's say, this third party and you're going in to like meet with people with this idea of helping them improve, and that's always one of those situations where I can see, like people can be defensive, you can put them under threat. That seems like maybe there's certain times when you can be really aware or sensitive to triggering that sort of brain reaction? Are there some other examples like that when we should be on high alert of how our behaviors are received?
The reality is, and this is the hard part about it, is it's not like somebody comes with a red flag and starts waving it at you. Things that feel very non-threatening to me can be very threatening to somebody else. And again, it's because of our own personal experiences, our own pasts, our own beliefs, our own experiences with the responses of others in certain situations. So, I always like to think that the first part is the awareness, understanding that if somebody starts reacting in a way that doesn't seem right or feels a little off, I think our spidey senses start to tingle a little bit there, then having the awareness that, hey, maybe there's something going on that I'm not aware of, or I can't understand because I haven't experienced it. And so that awareness just has to be first. And then using some practical activities or, practical ways to align with improvement in how the brain works.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, I guess, something that I've kind of learned myself in the last few years, probably like during the early parts of COVID, I think. Like you have these days where, a lot of days like I feel pretty resilient, I feel pretty motivated. But then there's some days where I'm like, I find that I'm really frustrated and during COVID, I had COVID like a lot of people. And like, I became more conscious than any other time of being sick that I'm sick right now and my brain's not functioning right. And so I remember thinking, I can't make this decision right now because I know that I don't have my best brain with me today. And that little insight for me is something that I've kept with me because now I kind of have this like little flag that fires for me where if I'm really frustrated with somebody that I'm not normally frustrated with, I kinda have this, like, little checklist that I go through, like, "How am I feeling?" I have one of these Aura rings, which is kind of, it tells you how you slept and how you and there's some days where it's like, "Hey, your body temperature is higher," but it's increased this, like, awareness of what's going on, and I realize, "Hey, maybe the reason why I'm not motivated today or I'm a little bit short today is kind of a physical thing." I don't know, is there like, what's the connection between stuff like that and the brain?
You bring up a good point, and I know there's connections in there somewhere. Now, to try to pinpoint exactly your connections on any particular day and compared to my connections on any particular one of my days, they're all very different. But yeah, you think about when you're tired. You said you've got older kids. Think about when they were younger and you weren't getting a lot of sleep. And then the next day, you're kind of short with your wife, and all of that plays in because it's a protection mode. Like I said, our brains are so super smart and they'll tell us what to do if we listen. And so if you didn't get sleep the night before, or you were just in an argument with somebody, or something physical went on, what's going to happen inside your brain, there's going to be that little bit of a threat response, even though it's not the bear or it's not even a boss yelling at you or something like that. It's your brain is telling you that we need to slow down. I think number one, I think that's great that you got your little aura ring. I haven't played with those yet, but I think the awareness that it brings is so powerful because it's I guess if I had a goal, it's to bring some of that awareness to people. I'm going to tell them start wearing a ring. I don't know who can we get a sort of kickback or something on the rings,
Yeah.
because I think that's great because it's very hard to tell yourself to calm down or to think differently.
Yeah.
Read any book on this subject, and I've seen where they'll tell you, snap the rubber band as a way to get yourself out of something, or just think to yourself, hey, what's going on with it? But when you're in the midst of that threat response, it's so hard to do. But maybe, yeah, the ring blinking at you or something like that is enough. I don't know, does it blink at you? But yeah, maybe it's enough to just raise that awareness so that you can reflect.
Well, that is I like how you described that with the brain science because there is kind of like the two sides or, kind of like those two reactions. The one of them that is very and I'm probably not using the right words, so forgive me as, somebody like, just like the very basic terms for the brain, but kind of like the emotional response, like I kind of feel like hey, I'm under attack, that response feels very
Threat
emotional
response.
versus the logical. And I mean, uh, we probably all have a little bit more of one or the other. We kind of lean a little bit more into one or the other, but knowing that they both exist has got to be helpful. Personally, fine. I probably default a little bit more to like the logical side, but it is curious to me, like, is there a trick for snapping yourself out of that that emotional response? Because that one for me feels like the most difficult to handle.
Yeah, because you have to remember to go take 10 deep breaths, right? Which is a popular strategy for pulling yourself out of an emotional response. The brain is we're really either in threat response or we're in reward response. Very seldom are you stagnant. You might be going back and forth between them, and of course you don't even know what's going on inside your brain. But you have threat responses and you have the reward responses, and if you can feel or you can feel it, but if you can become aware of the feelings from the threat response, then it's a lot easier to do things like, okay, I'm going to walk away, which is one that I've gotten pretty good at. I wasn't always good at, but I can tend to be fairly emotional in heated conversations. Let's put it that way. But if I'm in the middle of a heated conversation, I used to just, I'd go back and forth with you. I grew up with seven brothers and sisters, and I was number seven. So you had to have a voice and you had to come back, or otherwise you're just, beat up to a, emotional pulp. So what I've learned over the years, or I'm practicing, I should say, getting better at is when I feel that little spidey sense coming up, I feel my palms getting a little sweaty, I feel my voice raising a little bit, being able to say, can you give me 5 minutes? Or can we come back to this in an hour? You have to give yourself time for your threat response, for your amygdala, for your whole survival brain to come back into a state of calm. And that does not happen immediately. I can snapping the rubber band. I told you that's a strategy that's in a lot of different books and different therapy sessions and such. The problem is you're still I snapped the rubber band, but I'm still mad. I'm pissed. Excuse the expression. But
Yeah.
and so that's not pulling me out of it. So time is going to be your biggest friend. And at least for me, I'm a really reflective person and I don't know that I've ever had an argument with my husband or somebody that I work with or whatnot that I didn't walk away after maybe being a little too sharp or whatnot and reflecting and going, gosh, I wish I would have said this or I feel really bad or whatnot. So if you can give yourself time, or if you see somebody on your team getting this emotional response, because you're not the one that's emotional at that point, it's a great tactic to say, hey, let's take an hour. Let's go have some lunch. Whatever the case may be, but give time its chance to calm things down.
That's I love having like some practical tips and, like going for a walk. I think just again, part of what we want to do here is just bring awareness to people about tools and things and this idea of like the brain science, like being conscious of your own brain and what your own brain is trying to do to you and realize that your brain doesn't always have your best interests, right? Sometimes it's like,
Well, it does. It just has an interest
yeah,
that's counterintuitive. It thinks it's like going to die, and
yeah,
it's not logically, but you don't have the logic anymore.
maybe not your best long-term interest. Like it's very
Yeah,
like right
exactly.
now. That's interesting.
Exactly.
Are there any you mentioned like the reward system. I've read books like Charles Duhigg, I think the habit loop, and he talks about like the trigger, the routine, and the reward. When you refer to the reward system, is it kind of in that context or is it something else?
I don't know. I'll be honest, I have not read that book. I assume it's probably pretty similar, but when I talk about it, I think about the things that we can do in practical settings, in the work setting that can improve or can be improved, I should say, with how the brain works. If we keep that in the front of our thought process and though, I mean, there's lots of different activities or things that we can apply, but I think of three in particular. The first is clarity, and that's where we can provide insight about things like the purpose of the change or the thing that's happening, or the maybe defining the roles each person is going to play. Because our brain, again, it doesn't like not knowing. Our brains don't handle ambiguity at all, and so you will probably think of some of the situations that you've been in. Our brain will make up stories. Where we were talking earlier about making stuff up, right? Our brain will make up stories, and typically, what the stories that it will make up are typically worst case scenarios. What the bad thing could be. Oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job. Oh my gosh, there now I'm going to have to report to this person, or blah blah blah. So all that's going on, and if we can provide a little bit of clarity around some of the changes, that's one of the first things that you can do in the work setting, even in your personal world.
Mhm.
When change is going on, just sit down and talk through what it means, why we're doing it, and that thing. So that's the first thing. The second part is implementing some sort of I call them communication rhythms. There's lots of different names for them, but they can include, like, some people call them huddles or tiered meetings or Gemba walks or whatever. They're all great. They're intended to do similar things, but increase communication, which of course then connects to clarity and insight, so that everyone is in the know and everyone has some way to either ask for help or to pass on important information, both up and down the organizational structure. So, this is going to help people feel valuable and valued, and it's going to help them feel heard. Those are the first two. The third one, and these are not in any particular order, by the way, is having some process for marking and celebrating success. I think we do so many good things and we forget to celebrate them. Celebrating small wins, at least as far as the brain's concerned anyway, it's not fluff. It really does provide a reward signal in the brain. And so those three: clarity, communication rhythms, celebrating progress and success, those are going to turn events into habits. And they're not the only activities, of course, but I think of those three as kind of the foundation. When we think about lean, 5S is foundational, right? Well, these three are foundational to helping our brains stay in the reward state. So when we talk about the brain's reward, what we're talking about is making people lean in instead of pull back. That's really the gist of it. It's the part of the brain, when you're in the reward state, that releases dopamine. You've heard of that probably. It's kind of the love chemical or whatever, and that signals progress to the brain, or it signals pleasure in the brain when something feels meaningful and safe or successful. It's the yes, do that again signal, because the brain likes the reward state. And so when leaders create environments where people feel safe and they feel connected and they feel capable, that reward system is going to stay active. And when the brain starts associating change and improvement with positive outcomes, the brain is going to feel good instead of being that threat mode, which, remember, the glucose isn't going to your prefrontal cortex, the logical part. You just stop hearing it. And so that's where the idea of this brain model comes in. And that's that framework that I created to help leaders remember what the brain actually needs to stay engaged and stay in the reward state instead of the threat state. Um, Go ahead.
So and again, I can't remember where I've heard all of these things, but it has to do with brain science somewhere, I think. But I've heard this idea that if you have anxiety or if you have like excitement, that there's some real similarities into like what's happening maybe chemically in the brain between those two things. And so if you can figure out how to reframe a situation that maybe causes you anxiety to say, well, it's really the same. I don't know how truthful this is. It's like the same chemicals or kind of the same reaction to being excited. So if you can figure out how to frame that in terms of excitement, we all get excited about, some of the things. I'm wondering if there's any similarity in like the brain science that you're familiar with between reframing those things in a more helpful way.
Yeah, there's definitely similarities there. And, I think of it, a practice I started years ago now. You're driving down the road, and unless it's just me. But some drivers out there can tend to frustrate me. And I drive pretty fast, but some of them drive really fast and they'll cut you off or they'll do things that, just really make you mad and want to say bad things. But I learned about reframing. And so what I'll do is I tell myself a story. And I think this is probably closely tied to what you're talking about. I'll tell myself a story about why that person is doing the thing they're doing. And oftentimes because I tend to be an emotional person, or I connect with emotional things that could almost make me cry just thinking about him. But so, for instance, guy cuts me off, and so I'll throw myself in a little story of, oh my gosh, he's got a sick daughter and he's taking her to the hospital, and all of the sudden, it's this. Like I said, our brains are so freaking smart. You don't even have to purposely do it. Your brain will fill in the blanks. Um, I'm the person, I don't know if you're this way, but I'm the person that if I'm watching a story, I know darn well it's not true, but I'm crying over the dog dying. So my brain puts me into that emotional state. So doing the storytelling, the reframing in that situation is very similar, I think, to what you're talking about of, okay, what's the excitement part of here? Because the brain does not know the difference between real excitement and potential. There are a lot of studies out that have shown that just thinking about the potential of something really cool happening will light up our brain sensors just as much as the really cool thing actually happening. So yeah, just thinking about it is cool.
That's so good. I'm reminded of somebody shared this with me at one point, but it was like, as humans, we have this tendency to judge everybody else based, like, we judge ourselves on our intentions. Oh, I meant to do good. I meant to get home on time. I meant to pick that up. I didn't mean to cut you off, right? Like, it's all about our intentions. But
It's so true.
everybody else we judge on their actions. Like, oh, that guy cut you off. He must be a horrible person.
Yep.
And
Yep.
for me, that's one of those things that hey, just like give, the benefit of the doubt, like what is actually happening. Cause we read so much into things. And I think you're so right. Like our brain has a tendency, and it's probably like habits, like how we train it, how we teach ourselves to like go down, kind of a positive, helpful path, or one that's gonna make us frustrated. I think that's a really, really interesting subject.
Oh, I could talk about it for hours. I know we only have, a short period of time, but this is just such a passion. I'm such a geek for neuroscience these days. But it will always come back to, first of all, the awareness, but the important thing I think that makes true difference in an organization and in the performance of an organization is really creating an environment where those things become part of just who you are. And that's why I created the brain model. There's a couple other models out there that are really great, but they didn't necessarily connect to organizational excellence and performance. And so I created the brain model, and stands for, belonging, resilience, autonomy, insight, and nurturing, the five domains of a brain friendly culture that supports organizational excellence. And in the model, going through each one of those, like belonging, that's the sense of, or creating an environment that has the sense of I matter here, and that's going to allow people, to not only speak up but to share ideas and take part in the improvements without fear of looking stupid or somebody telling them they're stupid or failing, that kind of thing. Without belonging, most CI programs, they stall because people won't risk suggesting or even questioning change that somebody else has suggested. So that's the B. Resilience is the next one, and resilience is about the ability to recover, to learn, to adapt when things don't go perfectly. And continuous improvement is full of setbacks, or at least everyone that I've ever been involved in has setbacks, right? Cultures see those setbacks as learning, not losing. They're part of normal everyday life. But A lot of organizations, they don't have that culture. The third one in the model is autonomy. Autonomy, I don't care if somebody swears up and down, oh, I don't have to have autonomy. I don't need to make any decisions. I call bull. Our brains need control. Different levels of control will trigger the threat response in different people. But when people have some type of ownership over their work, over, or at least some influence, they move from just that compliance piece of, somebody told me I had to do it, so I'll do it, check the box, to a commitment to that higher purpose. And leaders who give people the space to solve problems light up that internal motivation network that drives engagement. All of our brains like to feel in control, whether we want to admit it or not, even if it's in some small way. I'll give you an example with my granddaughter. At one time, she got in this stage last year. She's 8 now. She was 7, and she didn't like to take baths. And so she'd come to grandma's house, and I'd say, Malin, you got to take a bath. I don't want to take a bath. And so it was like this battle. And so what I learned through some of my research here is, instead of saying, hey, you have to go take a bath right now, I would ask her, when would you like to take a bath? Would you like it to take the bath before dinner or after dinner? And just that small amount of autonomy changed. I mean, best tip ever. Autonomy is that third one, that third domain that if you have in your environment, it's gonna help keep people in the reward state. Insight is the next one, and we talked about this already. It's really about clarity and understanding. It's that click when people understand why something matters and how their work contributes to that bigger picture. Because we like, especially the newer generation, we like to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And clarity quiets the brain's threat response. It keeps us from making up those stories, worst case stories, right? So those moments of understanding, they're sparking curiosity and creativity, the hallmarks of real improvement. And that's what we want. We don't want to be the lean team that goes in and tells people how to do stuff. We want people to play along and contribute. And then the last one in the brain model is nurturing. It's the last of the 5 domains, but it's by no means the least important. It's the environment that reinforces all the rest. Coaching, recognition, consistency. It's where trust and growth, which I think are so important, it's where they live and where the brain learns that improvement is not only safe, but it's valued and it's worth repeating, and we're part of that process. So, when these 5 needs are met, the brain's reward system stays switched on. People don't just comply, they contribute. Improvement becomes something they want to do instead of something we tell them they have to do. So, I think the secret in CI is the build these domains into the environment where change is desired.
And you use the term culture. Sure, I like culture with a capital C because like it's a thing. I'm curious, when you say culture, how would you suggest like a leader, manager, somebody in a company uses this brain model and in relationship to like the culture?
So, interestingly, I think, and I agree with you, capital C on the culture. In the beginning, I said earlier, it was all about the tools, but I started to see this culture thing. And now it's a buzzword all over the place. But culture for me, it's really the backdrop for everything. It's the environment the brain is constantly reading to decide whether to engage or to go into survival mode and protect. And so every tone in a meeting, like I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting and the boss just gives you that little sharp little dig or something like that. Every decision, every policy, they're going to send a signal to the brain about what's safe and what's not. And when people feel valued and secure, the brain is relaxed, like we talked about already. And we're going to see behaviors like curiosity, collaboration, and ownership. But when the environment breeds uncertainty, blame, fear, all of those things, our brain is going to move into that defense mode. And the behaviors we observe are going to mirror that environment. People go quiet. That's one of my emotional states. Is if I go into a threat response, my brain, I just shut down and I'm quiet. And people that know me well, they're like, "Okay, you're quiet. What's going on in there?" Because I'm never quiet. But people are going to go quiet, or they're going to avoid risk. They're just going to be nope, I'm keeping my head down. I'm not doing anything. And that's never good for our organization. But all of these behaviors, that's what makes culture. The Shingo model, and I'm very much connected to it and very much believe in it. But the Shingo model has, three things that make up culture. We have beliefs, we have behaviors, and we have values. And when you think about the people that work for you, they grew up with their parents and in their communities and in their own individual churches or whatever. And that's what kind of formed their beliefs. Their values come from their families and such. Those two are really hard to change in people. If I come to work for you, you're going to have a hard time changing my values and my beliefs. However, behaviors, those we do have some influence over. Culture isn't what's written on the wall in the foyer, even though we like to have a pretty little framed sayings that tell us what our culture is. Culture is really what we see every day in our daily work. Those are the behaviors. And if we want to see ideal behaviors, we have to create an environment that supports those behaviors. And that's the neuroscience of culture in action, I think. The brain simply reflects the system that it's in. And when organizations intentionally design the culture around what the brain needs, the belonging, resilience, autonomy, insight, and nurturing, people are naturally going to show up with the kinds of behaviors we say we want: engagement, accountability, improvement, those kind of things. Improvements aren't forced, or they shouldn't be forced. They emerge because the environment is going to make them possible. And that's negative or positive. Whatever your environment is, that's what's going to show up.
You said something a couple minutes ago that I want to come back to, and you didn't use the word like reoccurring meetings, but that's kind of what stuck in my head. You called them huddles or stand ups. And I think that there's something interesting about a regular cadence of something, because what you're saying with like the brain science, what I'm kind of hearing is like, when something's familiar, you're like, "Okay, I've been here before, I've done this, I know this routine." Anytime we're going somewhere new, you're always a little bit on edge, like, "What's this gonna be like?" Right? But then if you've been there before, like, you're like the old pro, like, I mean,
Brain's calm. We know what to expect.
so
Yeah.
it seems like there's something that knowing that, when you talk about architecting the culture, having those cadences in a way is maybe one of the things that a leader can do to create that stability, where it's kind of like what you did with your granddaughter. It's like, it's not a question of are you going to take a bath or not? It's like, when are you going to do it? You want to do it before dinner or after? Like, I kind of think that there's something with these improvements. Like, a leader can say, like, hey, like, we're going to do some improvements. Are we going to do them once a day? Or are we going to do them once a week? Or, I think that's
Right.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, and what you'll find with the activities that we have in our organization, and you mentioned the huddles, so I'll use those as an example. Again, whether you call them a huddle or a tiered meeting or blah blah blah, they will support those different domains in different ways. Like when we have a huddle, I talked earlier when I talked about them about how they connect to communication and why that's important to the brain, because the brain likes clarity. It likes to know. It doesn't like ambiguity. And so there's that aspect of the brain going on. But to your point, the brain also likes repetition. So the brain is a very efficient tool that we have. It will take the shortcut every single time. And if we understand that it likes those standards, that repetition, then we can feed into it by, like you said, instead of having, like in some companies I know, their way of communication is when something goes wrong, that's when we're going to talk about it. Well, then the brain goes, oh my gosh, anytime somebody wants to talk to me, it's like being called to the principal's office when you were a kid, right? It must be bad. So if you can create uh, some standards that the brain likes, that's working on the other part of that reward system or lack of threat system. So yeah, all of that is relatable for sure.
I think that's so interesting, and I like to, like you said with your culture model, it's hard to look inside someone's head and see what their beliefs are, their values, but we can work a lot on the behaviors and the behavior patterns, and like you said, whether you call them huddles or stand up or tier meetings, there's some common threads there. I believe that you probably have some advice of like whether you call it a tier meeting or a huddle, like what are some things that should be part of those meetings to tick the boxes for the brain of, I'm sure if it's like too repetitive, people check out. So it's got to kind of create a little excitement or opportunity, but also be kind of safe. What do you recommend they do with those type of meetings?
Huddle specifically, uh, it depends. Everybody hates that answer, but every organization's a little bit differently. I mean, think about the maturity level of the organization, its current culture, the size of the organization, the kind of problems that they're having. So there's a lot of it depends, but there's certain things I think that feed into how the brain works. One of the things that I do like consistency. So if I'm working with an organization, we are planning. It'll be different in different organizations, but we're planning, okay, when is this level of group of folks going to get together? And it's very short. It's not long conversations. We have very specific things we're going to get into. And then the next group of people are going to meet, and then the next group of people. And so we make decisions so that we have those standards, and we set behavioral expectations that you have to actually come to those meetings. Um, they're not, what's the word? This is my COVID long term, by the way. I forget words. Simple. They're always stupid, simple little words. But they're not optional. Optional. That's the word I was looking for. And then it becomes part of your day. It's like when I have a new habit or something, like exercise. I hate to exercise. I didn't used to, but I hate to exercise. But I know, as I get older, I need to move my body more and especially my flexibility. Well, if I know that I need to spend some time on it, but if I try to do it in and of itself on its own, I'll I'll find something else to do. So I will tag things, and this is a strategy. I will tag some of those habits into things that I'm already doing. Like I know because it's already a habit that I'm going to brush my teeth every day, right? So I will do some flexibility or strength training while I'm brushing my teeth. And so you do those kind of things with your huddles as well as while you're having the huddle. You get that, first of all, get the habit that, yes, it's just part of your everyday thing. And then while I'm doing that, let's add another habit, a behavior as part of that until we have that habit down pat, and then you can change them. And we call them KBIs, or key behavioral indicators. And when I think about measuring continuous improvement programs, we all in companies we work under KPIs, right? Key performance indicators, and those are always our lagging indicators and stuff. And those are some of the things that we would talk about in huddles, or because we need to know where we stand. It's part of our progress, but also pulling in, okay, if we want this system to perform well, what are the behaviors that we need to see? And then measure some of those behaviors because they tend to be leading indicators of the KPI. So if I do these things and I measure them, then I'm going to have good success in this particular system or whatnot. And so in those huddles, I always recommend talk about the behaviors that you want, talk about how you're living them. Another thing I love putting into huddles is not having the same person run them all the time. Some companies have
Sure.
it's the supervisor always
Yeah.
doing the talking, and everybody else just stands around and they might answer a question or whatever. I will purposefully, and I tell them up front, this is how it's going to go. Just like when I teach my classes, if they're doing a report out, everybody takes a turn, but it gets them to own a piece of it and have kind of some skin in the game. So that's another strategy that I love to put inside of my huddles.
This episode is brought to you by KPI Fire, the all in one platform for continuous improvement. With KPI Fire, you can align strategy, drive execution, and engage your people. So, whether you're leading a team or driving enterprise wide change, KPI Fire helps you deliver real results. Learn more at www.kpifire.com. Well, Chris, I'd like to move into this last little segment. I like to call this the rapid fire. So these are just some quick questions and, kind of shorter answers, you might say. So the most important job of a leader is to blank.
Ooh, for me, the most important job of a leader is to make it easier for people to do great work. I mean, I guess that's as simple as I could answer it. It means clearing the noise, setting the tone, making, or I guess not being the source of everyone's stress. I've been in enough teams to know that people don't shut down because they don't care. They shut down because the environment makes it hard to think, speak up, or try new things. So good leaders, they get that, and they don't manage people as much as they manage energy, and they calm the brain and work on that. So yeah, just make work feel safe and clear enough that people can bring their best ideas to the table. That's really it, and maybe have some fun doing it.
Absolutely. I think having fun is a big part of what we should be doing at work.
Yeah.
Um, I've heard somebody say one time about talking about like how do you motivate people, and the response was something like, "Look, it's really hard to motivate people. You could spend all of your time just focusing on not demotivating people. You'd be ahead if you just did."
So true. So very true.
Well, I like to ask all of our guests for a book that they recommend, and I bet I can predict the answer on this one.
Well, it is a really hard question to answer. And as you know, my publisher would kill me if I didn't recommend my own. But really, um, it really, for me, it depends because I think it depends on where you're at on your journey. And so I've always had a hard time saying, yeah, you've got to go read this book because some of the books that I think are amazing, I think they were only amazing because I happened to be at that point in my journey where it connected. There's so many great books. There's so many great authors out there. And, I think again, if I read it at the wrong time, I might like it or not like it, either one because of that. But there are a couple of books that I do find myself recommending all the time because I think it's not one of those. It depends on your journey. The two are Thrive by Design by Don Ream. I don't know if you've read that one. That's the first time that I read a book that had anything about neuroscience. It's not a neuroscience book, but it has pieces of neuroscience in it. And this was after I started down my geekism for neuroscience. So I love that book. And the other one is Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. That is an amazing book. Like I said, Don's book is all about a little bit of neuroscience. Liz's book is probably the best I've ever read on leadership specifically, where she's all about multipliers, is about, bringing the next set of leaders on and how you can accidentally be a this is not her words, this is my words, but being a crappy leader and you don't even mean to, you just accidentally fall into it. So those two are the two that I constantly recommend.
Those are good
And
ones.
they're not lean. They're overall.
That's one thing that I think is worth pointing out too. I know a lot of times when you start talking lean, you get painted into this like almost like this cult of, the cult of lean or something. But I think that lean is, for me, lean is like, hey, there's really this like discipline of knowledge and learning and curiosity and this like skill set of evolution. And lean is like a language and a set of tools to put around it, but it really is part of this bigger umbrella of just continuous improvement and problem solving and working on the right thing. I mean, it's such a bigger body of knowledge than just lean.
Absolutely. Because it was tools, now it's principles, and, some of the principles like respect every individual. Liz's book
Oh,
speaks
yeah.
so well to that, as does Don's book, and so being humble and all, some of the other principles of lean, that does broaden from so much more than a toolbox.
I think the respect foundation that's part of lean to kind of refer to Stephen Covey and how he talks about principles versus values, like respect is one of those principles that whether you believe in it or not, whether you value it or not, like it's a thing that matters with people. And if you show respect, like it works better than not showing respect. So it's such a, that's one of those foundational pillar that is just really, really solid.
That's the
Definitely.
thing about principles. It's like gravity. It is whether you believe in it or not, doesn't matter. They are there and they govern consequences. If you live the
Absolutely.
principles, good things happen. If you don't live the principles, bad things happen. It is.
Yeah, if you're interested in a curious read, go Google principles versus values.
I've actually done some Googling on that because as a Shingo affiliate, we teach obviously a lot of we teach the workshops that Shingo has. And in every class that I've ever taught, somebody will ask me the difference. And we do differentiate them. One, what's
Yeah.
the difference between this one and that one? And I, through some of that Googling that I've done, and how we explain it, at least through the Institute, is values, they're interpretable. Your interpretation of honesty is going to be different than my interpretation of honesty. Is little white lies okay? I don't know. Depends.
Yeah.
But principles, like gravity, they are. You can't have an interpretation of them.
Yeah. Principles like, I mean, respect, I would say is definitely a principle. Like you can value respect or not. It doesn't, but it's going to affect you
Yeah,
regardless, right? Like,
absolutely.
I mean, even things like physical fitness and health, right? You can choose to value physical fitness and health or not. If you don't, you're going to pay the consequences of it regardless, right? Whether you value it or not. It's
It is.
a principle. I love that. It's a great, okay, in terms of lean toolboxes, or like lean tools, is there a favorite one that you turn to that you find yourself, like, using more frequently than others?
And this question is equally as challenging as the book one, because it does depend. You know, a long time ago, I don't remember anymore who it was, probably one of the many wonderful mentors I've had, but they told me that a CI practitioner really needs to be more like a general contractor as it relates to like the likeness to building a house, for instance. That you want to be a general contractor and not a specialist, like a roofer or plumber, because we need to be able to pull the tool that makes sense in the situation that we're in. And I've always loved that. And I really do believe it to be true. But outside of that, I think my favorite is probably A3 in the specific toolbox because I feel like A3 applies in almost any situation. So it's not like a tool that solves one problem. It houses all the other tools and it's always appropriate, right? And the other thing is I am such a sucker for a good story and A3 is really meant to do just that, tell a good story. So I love A3.
Awesome. Whenever we use the jargon, kind of the industry jargon on the podcast, I like to just try to explain it because I know not everybody is like super familiar. So for somebody that might not be super familiar with lean and what an A3 is, could you just describe what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So A3 is in the simplest form, it's the size of paper. And that's what it was named for. But the idea is that we can take a problem or an opportunity or a goal or something that we are trying to obtain, and we can use one piece of paper and tell the story of it. Now, the way I do A3s is I use the PDCA format, plan, do, check. But it's basically you describe the problem and then you understand the analysis of what's going on, current state, and then you have some, solutions that you put out there to try, and then you check to see did we accomplish the goals that we intended to accomplish. That's the check side of things. And then act is all about either cement the good stuff that happened into place or we're going to come back around if we didn't get the intended results and we're going to do it again, but it's all on that one piece of paper that anybody, no matter your level of education or whatnot, that anybody can understand.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a like a constrained page for problem solving through a structured sort of approach. So I love that it's a great tool for helping you think through a problem or present a problem. So
Yes.
definitely, that's a great choice. There's no wrong answers to that question,
No,
certainly, but that's definitely a great one.
catch me next week and I might give you a different answer.
Yeah, it's okay to have a different answer every time we ask that question. Okay, do you have a favorite question? Is there a question that you like to ask?
The question that I ask probably the most is why. I like to tease my consulting clients that they pay me a good amount of money to come in and be a 3-year-old because I tend to ask why. Why is this happening? Why is that not happening? And they get a good laugh out of it. But yeah, that's probably the question that I ask the most often because I am not ingrained in the way that the companies I work with do their work. And so I haven't been assimilated into, wearing those rose colored glasses. And I just do it because we've always done it that way. And so I can ask the silly questions and make people think.
I think that curiosity that represents is definitely one of those core values or just intrinsic nature of people that are successful in this kind of work is you really have to be very curious. One of our guests said, I'm kind of picturing like the amygdala in the brain, like creating curiosity and be like, why is this happening? Versus like, oh, that's really interesting. Why? Tell me more about this. Or curiosity can come across two different ways.
Very different perspectives.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Okay, last one of these rapid fire. Finish this sentence. Continuous improvement is
This could be answered in so many different ways. Let's see here. Continuous improvement is the art of helping people and processes get a little bit better every day. And if I add a little neuroscience spin to it, by making it easier for the brain to say yes to change.
so. Chris, where do you see the future of CI? I know everybody's talking about AI and what's going to happen. What do you think the future of CI professionals is?
Well, if I have my druthers, of course, it's going to include a lot about neuroscience, that's for sure. But outside of that, no, you hit the nail on the head. AI, and I'm doing a lot already, working with companies with that. There's some really cool stuff out there. We're already using like for value stream analysis, pattern recognition, and process data to help us identify trends that, us humans might miss, voice of the customer analysis instead of just, that survey that you get the 1 to 5 Likert scale on or something like that, identifying themes. Um, Digital twins for simulation of processes is another really cool AI tool or use, getting a lot of big attention right now, being able to play in a sandbox to see impact before rolling out some full blown solution. The other one is smarter AI enabled visual management dashboards. That's really cool. Of course, there's lots of software programs to help you create the visuals, but what I've seen and I've been helping a couple companies create is where it'll take the dashboard and then it'll analyze and it will actually give you some recommendations for, hey, you went down in this area. Let's focus on blah, blah, blah. So I mentioned these as future of CI because that's what the question is. But the reality is kind of like the book that you said in the beginning, right? By the time this actually airs, this might be mainstream stuff. Our world is changing so fast. It really is a fun time to be in CI. I love it.
One thing that I think is interesting, and I think you're certainly well positioned to understand, is that particularly in enterprises, large enterprises, I think one of the biggest constraints to AI adoption is the human brain and our fear about what's going to happen with it with AI. So I think that the knowledge that you bring and the understanding of the human brain and how to make us humans feel comfortable and in control of the AI changes, I think is as relevant as it could ever be with things that are coming up.
I spent a lot of time just orienting people on just the basics of using, just ChatGPT or Copilot or something, because you're right. Our brains, they don't know what it's about. So it's scary. And of course, you listen to the media and it's going to, AI is going to take all of our jobs and those kind of things. But helping people understand how AI, which is the way I think it should be used, and the way I encourage it to be used, is as your assistant, and helping people just see that piece of it takes away some of the nervousness and the fear around it of, okay, I can use it in certain ways and it's going to help me.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It's been so much fun to have this conversation about lean and continuous improvement and brain science. For anybody that wants to be in touch with you, do you want to share a website or the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best way is probably email. I do tend to be very responsive. I can't ever promise that I'm gonna, answer within an hour, but that is one thing that people tell me I'm very good at is answering. So email chayes@getimpacts.com is a great way to get a hold of me. My website, impactperformancesolutions.com, is another way, but less impactful, I guess. But I'd love to hear from anybody who has any questions, or connect with me on LinkedIn. That's another way that I like to keep in touch with folks.
And your book, Wired for Excellence, Harnessing Brain Science, is that the title? And what's the best place for folks to find that? This is going to be out in a couple of weeks, so what's the best place to find that?
Yeah, so it's Wired for Excellence, Harnessing Brain Science for Organizational Success. It's a mouthful, but you can find it either on the Routledge website, that's the public publisher, or Amazon is carrying it. You can pre-order it now, and they'll start shipping it next Friday.
Wonderful. Wonderful. For our listeners, if you would like to suggest a guest or ask a question to Chris or myself, or give us any ideas for episodes or content, you can reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, easy to find, Keith Norris. This concludes this episode of KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If you've enjoyed the episode, please be sure to add a comment. We love to have comments or a like or follow, subscribe, the appropriate item on the platform. You can share the podcast with your friends or colleagues who are as passionate about continuous improvement as you are. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, keep driving progress and sparking change.